Hi there, it's me, Nick from the podcast, and I'm coming to you early, which can only mean one of two things. We're running late, or I've got a Kickstarter, and it's the second one. Yes, my new comic, Sold, an urban fantasy cyberpunk comic reuniting me with Phil Apley, who also drew Stone Cop, is now up on Kickstarter. You should be able to see a link both in the show notes and also across social media on both my channels and the MFV ones. There'll be a bit more chat about this at the end of the episode, but just to say, this is happening. And also, it's only a 2-week campaign, so if you rely on this podcast to remind you about my Kickstarters, then this is the only episode it will be mentioned on, so go now. There will not be another chance. Anyway, on with the episode.
Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be faking our death and going on the run to find who tried to kill our grandfather in Slow Horses Season 4, and then following our crush across time in Timestalker. But before all of that, Nick, what do you have to recommend to our listeners?
Sounds like we're really putting in a lot of effort this episode. In the last few weeks, I have been reading the entire run of the comic Criminal, which is a long-running crime anthology series from writer Ed Brubaker and artist Sean Phillips, published by, well, it's actually had two publishers in its time. First, it was published by a now-defunct personal project imprint of Marvel called Icon, and then it moved to Image, where many of these sort of personal projects end up. And yeah, this is, as I say, it's a sort of anthology. Basically, it tells a lot of sort of noir crime stories set around the same area, starring sort of vaguely interrelated or adjacent characters. A lot of people sort of drift in and out of these stories. You see a lot of the same families throughout their timeline. There's a lot of, like, the theme of violence and corruption sort of going down the generations. Like, you become quite familiar with one particular family, especially, and the way that the father sort of inflicted his horribleness on his sons. And yeah, it's in some ways it's almost best known for being one of the only crime comics that seems to be a sustainable proposition in the sort of comics direct market. It's been going since the, I think, late 2000s, early 2010s, and it's still going sort of occasionally. Like, Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips are still working together most of the time. They do a couple of graphic novels worth of material every, well, I think about one every 9 to 10 months. Every so often, one of them is a new Criminal story. I think the next Criminal story is coming out early next year. And yeah, it's really good, funnily enough. They're really good at this story, this kind of noir thing. These sort of doomed people going about their sad, probably fateful lives, having doomed romances, embarking on doomed heists, making clearly bad decisions. It's very sort of genre-y. Like, I read the entire series. It's about 10 or 11 storylines back to back. And does it get, I don't know if repetitive is the word, but predictable maybe? Yeah, a little bit, but they're just very good at finding these tropes and finding the differences and twists that make it work. Like, there's a couple of stories in which the world of Criminal bleeds into the comic industry, which is, you know, some might say a bit self-indulgent, but it's their personal project, so they can do what they want, and it's quite fun. Yeah, good comic.
Yeah, it does sound good. Yeah, it's interesting that it's been running for so long when there aren't that many long-running crime comics. Although I think we've discussed quite a few crime comics on the podcast, but there seem to be sort of, short run things like New Burn we both really, really liked, but that was, I guess, conceived to be a sort of 2-volume thing, and a few others. So it's interesting that this has entered this phase of going on and on, because there are obviously a lot of famous long-running crime TV shows, from like Sopranos to The Wire, that some of this sounds sort of similar to or like of a piece with. Yeah, so it's interesting that, there isn't that in comics so much, but I can see why people would like it.
Yeah, I think it is really well executed, but it is also, a bit of an odd thing that this kind of story that would, in most other mediums of genre fiction, be one of the most, obvious and common things, especially in, like, novels and TV shows. I think there's a lot of crime. Whereas in comics, it's the rare special baby of a crime series that has managed to go longer than, like, 1 5 to 6 issue storyline. I mean, Ed Brubaker especially has become kind of the crime guy. We've covered a few crime comics, and I think at least 1 or 2 of them have been by Ed Brubaker. He's done a lot of this.
Yeah, I just actually did a search on our website. We discussed, or I think possibly you did a recommendation on Reckless. That was by him and Sean Phillips. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Same creative team, yeah. That's their sort of other sort of regular ongoing project. Well, they did 5 Reckless books in a row, and then they went off to do different things again, including more Criminal. So yeah, they've got these 2 series. Reckless is a sort of slightly less noir, slightly more vaguely actiony detective type story, whereas this is more like straightforward noir, doomed people going about their doomed lives.
Yeah, I seem to remember you discussing Criminal when, it's kind of, I think it's the setup to when you're talking about Reckless. So it does sound familiar. I'm sure we've covered more than that. I'm just having a quick look.
We did another Ed Brubaker comic called Friday at one point, which was not drawn by Sean Phillips, but was very good. But yeah, I've read a lot of Ed Brubaker. Ed Brubaker, I think probably still his most famous work is writing the original Captain America Winter Soldier storyline, which was adapted of course, famously in one of the more well-regarded Marvel films. So yeah, he's done a lot of mainstream work as well, and obviously one of the reasons he's able to make the apparently unprofitable genre of crime work is because he's obviously brought a lot of his superhero fans back to it.
I can imagine there's a lot of people who will read whatever genre he writes in. I mean, I really enjoyed the Winter Soldier film. I think it still stands out as one of the best ones that Marvel have done so far. So yeah, no, it's probably partly based on the source material.
Oh yeah, the Winter Soldier comic is also one of the best storylines of its era. It's probably, I think, in a lot of people's top 5 to 10 ever Captain America storylines. Those are good comics.
So yeah, I guess he's a good writer, and so he's got a fan base, and the people will follow him to other projects. So it's still ongoing. It's not sort of built to a conclusion yet.
It's occasionally ongoing. I mean, they are meant to be doing another volume next year to tie in with the fact that there's actually a TV adaptation next year, starring Charlie Hunnam and Emilia Clarke, I think. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, I think they're doing a new volume of the book to tie in with that. The last volume was actually a few years ago now, I think sort of 2019. The last storyline they did was, I think, one of their longest storylines. It was like 8 issues long and did sort of resolve a lot of the remaining sort of mysteries and subplots. So they're coming back to it, I guess, partly to tie in with the TV show. But I'll be interested to see what direction they take it in next.
Yeah, and I'll also be interested to see what this TV show is like, because if it's a popular thing, which there's other well-regarded adaptations of this writer and artist's work, then I guess there's a lot of anticipation around that. And again, with people who've been unsuccessful in other things as well. So, again, sort of thing we might end up covering on the podcast if it's good, or at least not appalling.
Yeah, and if it gets some decent coverage, and obviously depending what else is happening that fortnight, Criminal could well make its way to the podcast. So yeah, I thought it was time to finally read the comics so I could be, smugly clued in when the TV show starts. And yeah, don't regret that. Good choice by me. They're extremely good.
Cool. Something that lives up to the hype.
Yeah, no, it's a classic for a reason, as they say. Oh yeah, but he also was the one of the showrunners of that Batman cartoon I did a few episodes back, Ed Brubaker. So yeah, truly a well-covered man.
Yeah, someone whose work, I guess comes up on the podcast, semi-regularly. There's quite a few people we've revisited several times, especially like comics writers who either adaptations of their work come up again and again, or we discuss the comics themselves.
Yeah, he is one of the guys. I think maybe partly because he was a big name in the sort of mainstream comics field when I was in my sort of teens, when you sort of form the tastes that take you through the rest of your life. So yes, I do keep an eye on his work, and yeah, still enjoying it. So yeah, that's what I've done. Alastair, what else have you consumed?
So this is my annual update from the London Film Festival, which I do around this time every year. At time of recording, the film festival is happening. I think it's in its 9th day, and it will be over and done by the time you're listening to this. And we'll know who the winners are and how everything shook out. Overall, actually, I feel this year's been kind of a bit of a disappointing year, which is a bit of a shame. I think it didn't help that some of the major films got some quite bad reviews on the festival circuit before they came out here, which is always a shame. Night Bitch, starring Amy Adams, it looked pretty good, got a bad review when it was shown at Toronto Film Festival. This new epic Elton John documentary also got a bad review. I feel possibly the fact that some of the high profile stuff wasn't so well received this year also meant that I really struggled to get tickets to some of the high profile stuff that I did want to see and was excited about. I wanted to track down Blitz. Could be in the running for Oscars this year. We'll wait and see. Wanted to see that, but couldn't get tickets. I wanted to see We Live in Time. Again, possible Oscar contender. We'll have to wait and see. But couldn't get tickets to that. So ended up with a sort of ragtag bag of... I've got 5 films I'm seeing this year. A bit of a mixed bag. I've seen 4 of them. By the time this comes out, I'll have seen the 5th. But there's been some interesting stuff. I saw a Chinese film called Caught by the Tide by, and apologies for pronunciation of this, is it Jia Zhangyi, I think, who's a man who's, seems to have remixed his own back catalogue to make this film, telling a sort of 20-year story of China, from like kind of the early aughts up to present day, using like kind of bits of films he's shot before and bits of kind of stuff he's documented himself to tell the narrative of this woman across time. And obviously with her aging naturally because it's an actress he's collaborated with before. That was interesting, though kind of slow-paced. I saw an interesting film called Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat very detailed documentary about decolonization in Democratic Republic of the Congo and the coup that brought Mobutu to power, and kind of linking that in with the American jazz music of the time and American foreign policy. That was a good film. It was long and very detailed, with lots of quotes from reports and analysis kind of coming up. Definitely an essay film. Possibly the best thing I saw so far this year is a very odd film, but it was very fun, called Universal Language, which is set in Winnipeg, but if everyone in Winnipeg was Iranian and spoke Farsi. And it's never really explained why it's like that. It's a bit of an odd film, this sort of, the Farsi Canadian film, with sort of people wandering around in the snow. Yeah, it's got a sort of whimsical plot line about these kids trying to get pickaxe and hot water because they found a 5,000, whatever the Iranian currency note is, frozen in a block of ice, and they're trying to get it out. It's got a very Wes Anderson sort of whimsical feel to it, and it's the sort of thing like kind of weird little town full of like these bizarre characters. There's a guy who runs like a turkey farm. There's a teacher who's a bit crazy and suspends the entire school because one kid doesn't have glasses. It's all a bit strange. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on this year. Saw a quite disappointing politics documentary called 2073 that was much hyped because it's from the guy who did Senna and Amy and the Maradona documentary, so he's got good form, but this was really quite disappointing.
Alastair is leaving a pause because I also saw this film with him and liked it even less than he did. I found the sci-fi conceit where they keep cutting to a hypothetical future pretty generic and underbaked, and then it kept cutting back to documentary footage from the present day to explain how this future came about, and I found that quite broad and generic and just a vague list of things that were wrong without much attempt to go deep or provide a particularly specific angle. It mostly just felt roughly the same as spending an hour and a half doom scrolling on Twitter, and felt just as empty, futile and slightly repetitive as that would. I did not like the film.
Yeah, no, it was not very good. Yeah, the future stuff really didn't add anything, and there wasn't really much of a narrative, and it was very generic. People live in ruined wasteland through war and climate change. It's stuff we've seen 100 times before. Fairly pointless. I don't know, all the bits in the present were basically a long list of current problems presented as in like the far right's a problem, climate change is a problem. But I maybe wonder like who's this film for? Like who's needs to be reminded that the rise of the far right or the rise of tech titans or climate change and things like that is a bad thing that we need to do something about. Like, if this is the London Film Festival and it's a sort of political documentary, I think most people will be very aware of these issues. There's nothing I learned new from this film because it doesn't go into a lot of detail, but like all the topics it touched on the far right, I've heard of all these dictators and know roughly what they're up to and the bad things, from Trump, aspiring dictator Trump, through to like, Xi in China, Putin, all the rest of them. I'm aware of all this stuff. I don't need it pointed out to me.
Yeah, I just didn't feel like it was really making a case in any meaningful way. I felt like it was just screaming, this is bad and it's bad, this is bad and it's bad at me again and again. And it's like, well, I do already know it's bad, and if I was someone who didn't, I don't know if this is the thing that would, convince me into action. It's mostly just a bit off-puttingly obnoxious. I personally wasn't really that up for having that much footage of dead bodies forced upon me of an evening.
Yeah, a lot of shock value. I mean, say what you will about Michael Moore, his sometimes liberal attitude towards the truth and the kind of silly stunts he do in his films that don't really make a point but get attention, is that at least through his comedic personality and the kind of outrageous stuff he does get people to go and see his films who wouldn't normally go to see political documentaries, and thus once you've got people hooked in, you can then deliver a message. And crucially, like, his films usually have also like a fairly actionable message, such as more gun control would be good, or like vote Bush out in the next election. Whereas this one had the problem that, a lot of climate change, especially climate change media and messaging and other things like things that big tech have, which is it kind of screams there's a problem, do something, without saying what, which actually just encourages people to be, fatigued and feel hopeless and that there's no point in doing anything because they don't know what to do. I mean, this is why people are getting invested in things like solar punk, because the idea behind solar punk is rather than yelling things are going to hell in a handcart like 2073 does, they show like, no, this is the better future we could have, positive thing, and so let's take steps to move in this direction rather than just shouting do something without actually saying anything to do, because that doesn't actually work.
Yeah, I would rather have seen some footage of a nice solar punk future. Can confirm, didn't enjoy.
Yeah. It was a bit of an odd film. I really don't know who that's for, because I don't think it's going to reach anyone who isn't fully aware of the issues. It's kind of a film for people who don't know who Peter Thiel is. I don't really think there are many people who go to documentaries about tech in the future who've never heard of Peter Thiel, for example.
Yeah, it's a sort of film which makes people say, people need to see this. It's like, do they?
But they're not going to.
If they did, do you think they would get much from it?
Well, they're not going to. That's the problem. Apart from the people who are going to see it, are the people who already read about these issues, and this film isn't particularly in depth, so they kind of know already what it's going to say. I mean, like I say, this isn't a Michael Moore film that gets people who are like largely disengaged with politics going down to the cinema to see something different. There's a reason why Steve Bannon said that Michael Moore is the only liberal he respects, which you can also interpret as the only liberal he's afraid of, because he's actually good at getting people to do things and, like, you know, getting attention of the kind of the people who aren't the sort of hyper liberals or lefties, whatever you want to call them, who are always reading The Guardian, signing the petitions, doing activism. They're the sort of people who, pop down to see this film. I think we sat in a room full of them when we saw it, but they don't need encouraging that the world's going to hell in a handcart. I think they know, and no one else is going to see this film. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of sums up my malaise a bit with the film festival this year. Yeah, I mean, got one film to see tomorrow. Let's see what that's like. If you go to the Twitter feed, you'll be able to see my take on tomorrow's film, which is called Skincare. But yeah, so, yeah, overall a bit of a disappointing year. Finding Universal Language was one of those rare festival gems. I don't know when else you get to see a Canadian Farsi film. I don't know why they made it. just I did want to say, like, why? Like, when I was watching, I was like, is there like a big like Farsi Persian community in Winnipeg? And I went online to look afterwards. Like, no, there really isn't. They just made a film when Winnipeg's in Iran, but also still in Canada, and it never explained why. Again, who's going to watch this film? It's all in Farsi.
So similar to 2073, but apparently in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so weird. It's just like, yeah, but it's like entertaining. It's you know, it's that some kids on a little quest, and, you know, there's also sort of like, yeah, again, they encounter these weird larger than life characters along the way. Yeah, I mean, it's very Wes Anderson. You know, there's some shots that could have come straight out of Wes Anderson, but you know, it's lovely. It's nice. It is actually coming out in the UK, so it is. You will be able to see this. It's not. I think next year we'll get at least some form of limited distribution. So there you go.
Okay, good. I'm glad we've been able to give at least one solid recommendation.
Yeah, that's a nice film. Go watch that. But yeah, we'll probably get at some point to the big films from the festival. Conclave, The Blitz, We Live in Time. I mean, I'm sure they're going to get general releases, if not at least released across London in the art house cinemas, and I'll be diving into them and at least posting on the Twitter feed, if not discussing them here. Possibly even a full review with Nick.
Well, yes, I know at some point we will reach the Oscar Best Picture nominees reviews, and we'll see what you think of, well, the ones that get those nominations.
Yeah, I think if Blitz gets 10 nominations, I can imagine we'll see it. It is also going to be on Apple TV, thus making it easier to see.
Score.
But yeah, watch this space for how the big stuff of the festival turned out. But yeah, the little stuff, a bit of a dud this year. Oh well, you live and learn. On to next year.
Okay, and first up for a full review today, it's Slow Horses Season 4. This is the latest entry from the spy drama, which we have covered a few times before, I think at least a couple of times, and given pretty solid reviews to, because it's very good, because it's one of the best reviewed shows currently on television. This is, of course, about a group of loser spies in the British Secret Service who work out of Slough House under Jackson Lamb, a disgraced former master spy. This series, they blunder into a conspiracy around one of their own, River Cartwright, who has faked his own death and vanished to look into a mysterious group who might be coming after his grandfather. And meanwhile, there's also a terrorist attack on a London shopping centre which might be connected to this mystery. Things get more involved from there. We have watched the new season, of course. Alastair, what did you think of it?
So I think this is one of the best thrillers on TV, if not just one of the best shows, full stop, on TV. Yeah, it really is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, enjoyed every episode. It's a nice, tight 6 episodes, hour long each episode. You know, tight thriller. Always a surprising twist or exciting cliffhanger at the end of each episode. It's tense, it's dramatic. The sprinkling of humour as well. It's not, you know, even as bantery and quip-filled as a Marvel film, but it's got its sort of moments of humour and lightness, and sometimes some dark humour as well. But then, yeah, it can deploy the tension when it needs to. There's some good twists in this season that are well executed. We might get into details of that, especially after a spoiler-free chat. But yeah, still going strong, still enjoying it very much, is the headline.
Yeah, no, this show has an almost metronomic quality level, which is both great and possibly not a route to amazing podcasting, as it just leads to us sitting here going, yep, it's good again. But yeah, it continues to combine the sort of mid-level spy drama of spooks. You know, it's not the sort of super realistic, but it's also not, you know, James Bond. So yeah, it's got a good sort of mid-level action spy thing going on, and it's also got the sort of dark comedy nihilism disaffected with the establishment vibe of The Thick of It, which makes sense because I'm one of the writers of The Thick of It is the showrunner of this show. So yeah, it's continuing that vibe, and in this specific season, yeah, we're maybe getting a slightly downscale storyline compared to previous seasons. The one thing you do notice about this show in the first few years is that even though our heroes are meant to be the sort of loser spies who just have been left in this crappy off-site office to rot, they do seem to end up saving the whole country quite a lot. They do seem to really end up right in the thick of things, even though they're meant to have been sort of shoved off to one side. And in this series, that is walked back a little bit. I don't think it's an intentional thing. I think it's more about, you know, varying things up. But yeah, this time, although things do still rise to a bit of an action crescendo at the end, it is a lot more of a sort of interpersonal conflict. It is a lot more about the characters and their personal lives and their personal disasters rather than the entire Britain being under threat. And I like that. I think it's a nice change. I think, you know, when this show insists on coming out, you know, every year and being reliably good, it's nice to have something a bit new to talk about.
Yeah, sometimes they even do 2 seasons a year. I think they have the budget for like 12 from Apple, who obviously have vast sums of money, and they cleverly do 2 seasons a year. I think 1 book a season, which yeah, again, just helps it be, I guess, tight as fuck, as we've described before. Really, nothing's wasted in this. And yeah, I like the, as you say, the kind of low-key spyness of it. You know, it's believable. It's not as believable as some of the, I guess, most hyper-realistic spy dramas, some of the Jean le Carré adaptations, or some things that really dig into the minutiae of modern spying, but it is done with a very thick sheen of believability, partly I think being kind of focused on these like kind of smaller conflicts. It's not like someone's stolen a nuclear weapon or a bioweapon or something like that. It's more sort of betrayals, traitors, kind of infiltrations, stealing secrets, that sort of thing. So yeah, that kind of level of believability. There aren't like these big all-encompassing conspiracies, but the other elements of believability is what you touched on, that also the authority figures are sort of rotten, incompetent, conniving. You know, it's not a sort of like the British going out and saving the world. You know, again, it's sort of certainly some of the earlier James Bonds can be. But yeah, like the villain in this one, for example, played by Hugo Weaving, who's a great actor and good to come in as a villain. He's the villain in this season, but he's just one guy, you know, a former spy who's, you know, got good spycraft, but he's not a super spy or anything like that. And he's got 3 soldiers that, you know, that he's trained up from birth, who are, again, good at fighting, but, you know, there's nothing particularly grandiose about this as a villain. It's not like an enemy state with a huge army or some secret organization like Spectre or something like that, or anything, you know, that kind of pushes the bounds of believability. It's just one unpleasant guy with his heavies. So again, it loops back to that level of believability.
Yeah, with the believability level, as I say, it's not like base level like the Americans or something, where all the action only really happens in alleyways or in darkened rooms.
Yeah,
there is a little bit of, you know, car chases or shootouts on the streets of London. They've amped it up a little bit to, you know, give us something to get the old blood pumping. But yeah, it's not also not, you know, full on stupid either. And yeah, the Hugo Weaving stuff this season is very good. Yeah, he's got a lot of charisma. He's not actually in that many scenes. I think he's only actually in about half the episodes, but he works well as a sort of almost a foil to Jackson Lamb in some ways, even though the two of them don't actually deal with each other that much. And if anything, he deals more with River Cartwright, but he does work as this sort of rival spy master for Jackson Lamb to try and outwit. As I say, it's an interesting change of pace compared to when they've been up against, you know, bigger terrorist schemes in previous seasons.
In one season, it's the far right sort of gang, who are going to commit like a murder or something like that. In one season, it's like Russian gangsters, and one season it's a private security firm. But yeah, this one very much, again, we're down to a kind of believable level of interpersonal conflict. I also like the fact that, like, if you've got 6 episodes, there's some good twists and surprises, but there aren't any like ridiculous twists, like, you know, and the conspiracy isn't that complicated, or, you know, again, it links it back to believability. It's not like 24. I mean, 24 did 24 episodes a season, 45 to 50 minutes each, and the layers of the conspiracy in each season was just usually vast and labyrinthine, sort of like 3-4 groups manipulating groups, shadows behind shadows sort of thing, all of it unraveled in one day, which got a bit ridiculous, you know, or certainly lost another show for the crazy twists. But yeah, I do like how the conspiracies are sort of, again, a believable level of intrigue, and also, it's not like super complicated, so it's kind of, the background and mystery is very much still serving the drama, raising the tension, because it's kind of not taking the place of drama, this kind of complex conspiracy plotting. It's more just there to provide twists and surprises to keep the show exciting, fresh, and keep it moving forward. So I think that element is handled very well.
Well, plus it arises quite well out of the characters. Like a lot of the drama that happens this season is related to the various dark secrets that River Cartwright's grandfather has been keeping, which we sort of got hints last season about that storyline bubbling up as River was dealing with his grandfather having dementia and forgetting things, and that becomes more and more prominent this season until it just massively screws them all over. Which, I don't know, maybe that's the show taking advantage of the fact that, they're covering these books, I think, relatively faithfully. Therefore, they know what's going to happen in, 1, 2, 3 seasons time, at least for now. So they can, seed things in advance and look clever.
Yeah, and it's generally quite moving, sort of River's sadness and, what he's feeling with the declining mental state of his grandfather who's raised him. He looks up to him. Again, for a show that's not a domestic drama, it's not about, the aging process. It's got enough in there to really make you feel like, this kind of sweet old man is sort of fading away, and it's quite sad. It works that it's, Jonathan Pryce is a great actor coming in playing the grandfather. He's been a Bond villain as well as playing a whole host of roles. And Jack Lowden, obviously, again, rumoured to be maybe the next Bond.
I swear you've been saying that for about 5 years now.
But they haven't announced it. I'll keep saying it until they do announce it, and then I'm wrong. Unless I'm right, in which case I'll be dining on that out forever. But anyway, they're good actors. They add that emotional level that's needed to make it believable, and it's in service of the spy film. But also it's got this good element which you get in a lot of spy things, which is even though Cartwright's grandfather is now a sweet old man, sadly declining due to Alzheimer's and dementia. But actually, when he was young, he was an unpleasant, dastardly figure who did some nasty things, possibly to save lives, possibly in the line of duty, possibly not, possibly just because of his own whims or whatever. Yeah, they're slowly unpeeling the mystery of what the grandfather did. There's some things they've hinted at in earlier seasons that surely they got to come back to at some point. But there is, that spy drama there. There's that family drama there, that tension. It's well acted, and it's all on a kind of believable scale. Again, the sort of nastiness of the past of the Cartwright grandfather character, it's in the sense of believable. It's not like no one thinks he killed the country, but he has definitely killed people, maybe people he shouldn't have, or ordered them to be killed.
Yeah, again, it's had a very strong sense of these characters having a past, which it's always sort of hinted at throughout. I mean, again, it's about them being able to play the long game. We had 2 years of River Cartwright and his grandfather having this quite nice relationship, and him giving him sort of fatherly advice about being better and trying to keep a cool head and, stuff like that. And it was quite sweet, and they've sort of slowly unfurled the stuff about his darker side in the last couple of years. And yeah, it's all very well done, and the show seems to have a good sense of, how to progress and make an interesting TV show, which, again, some of which may come from the book, but they're doing a good job of translating it. I do actually have a few of the books on Kindle, but I've not read them. And again, as they often do on this show, they've kept the characters turning over. They've done a good job of maintaining a sort of core 4 or 5 characters and keeping other people moving around them. Like there's a new head dog, sort of head enforcer at MI5 this year after they got rid of the last one last season, who brings a new vibe to it. And it's fun to see James Callis, aka Gaius Baltar from Battlestar Galactica, very consistently cast and very well cast as a sleazy politician here.
Yeah, no, he's great. Again, that's a classic. Will Smith. Again, Will Smith is in the showrunner of the show, not the musician and Scientologist. But yeah, it's another Will Smith thing, this kind of, a corrupt, sort of, sleazy, incompetent authority figures. Yeah, he's a perfect case of a sort of modern political apparatchik, in that, he's sort of keen on putting strategies with nice sounding buzzwords than actually getting work done. And then on all his high noble ideas about transparency and, for example, go out the window the second he's threatened in any way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I described it as sleazy, but as you say, it's very well brought through in that he sort of has this sort of political sheen of being well-intentioned and presentable and just trying to improve things. You kind of know it's going to turn out to be somehow bullshit because it's season 4. We know the show at this point. And also, to be honest, the fact that they're played by James Callis does kind of add to that feeling. But yeah, it's still fun to see him sort of unravel when it becomes clear that this might, these events might threaten him.
Yeah. That's one of the things I like is they keep adding new characters, bringing in new ones as well. There's a new member of the Slow Horses who's a sort of almost mute, clearly very traumatized individual who sits in the corner and occasionally says dark things. That's one of the sources of humour in the show that they so reliably go to that works quite well.
Yeah, and he doesn't actually do that much this season. He has a couple of big moments to make sure we notice him, but he doesn't do a huge amount. So I assume that is again another example of them teeing things up for future seasons, since they have the advantage of knowing what happens in those books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and with a little preview of the next season at the end, we know that character's back. I do like the whole Slow Horses squad are great. Obviously, Gary Oldman's excellent in everything he's in, and he's especially good as this kind of vile Jackson Lamb, the anti-Smiley, just the drinking and the farting and the terrible behaviour towards other people. So yeah, obviously he's great in that. Rosalind Elsra, I think, is great as one of the other Slow Horses, one of the other main ones. Yeah, recovering from trauma in a previous season. I really like, so bad with pronunciation, this is an unusual name, Amy Fiffen Edwards, or possibly Amy Fiffen Edwards. She's excellent as, sort of sarcastic former druggie who's landed herself in the Slow Horses unit. She was great when she was in Luther, great in this. She's a good back and forth with another character introduced in the last season, played by Kadif Kawan, who's another person who's got bounced for their addiction, but in his case, gambling. So yeah, they have a good back and forth, and I enjoyed their scenes.
Yeah, the show has a very good sense of the sort of the workplace, I think. It's very good at quickly establishing these sort of workplace dynamics. There are like people who like each other and have this sort of spiky but kind of affectionate back and forth. There are some people who everyone thinks is a bit weird. There's the computer guy, Roddy Ho, who everyone agrees
he's a great character.
He's a great character, but he's an awful human being. And therefore, by far, one of the most straightforwardly fun characters on the show. I do enjoy, and I saw that continuing this in the next season bit, how every season he has a new incredibly obnoxious haircut. I appreciate. It's a very well-established workplace. You really sort of get the feel for it, and therefore it's quite fun to see it put through its paces every year by a new ridiculous spy problem.
Yeah. They've got a good cast and stuff. Yeah, and they are not afraid to kill off characters. They killed off a core cast member this year, someone we've already discussed. I don't know, should we go into that at all? Dropping spoilers?
Do we have much to say about it other than, yes, they did it?
Yes, they did it, and it was good to keep that sort of fresh sense of tension, the sort of sense that core cast members can die. I'm pretty sure that the Gary Oldman and Jack Lowden characters have plot armor, as I believe people on the internet say. In other words, they're probably going to be fine. But yeah, the other people, could really get dispatched at any moment, which, increases the jeopardy and tension.
Yeah, there was a moment this season when I thought they might kill off Jack Lowden. But yeah, a bit of a cutback. But yeah, I think he's probably good for the long haul. Yes, this show's willingness to cycle people out and bring new people in does help keep it fresh and does reduce any level of repetition it might have. So yeah, no, this remains a great show, one of the best on TV. I did notice that as of this season, we have reached a point on Twitter where people are now making fun of the endless praise that Slow Horses gets. I've seen sort of people mocking Guardian headlines about, praising Slow Horses, which is something else I saw with Succession towards the end. So I guess, is this the new bit of universally praised premium telly? Who knows? It's really good, though.
A good bit of British tall poppy syndrome must drag down anything that people like. I mean, from a discourse or journalistic or writing perspective, constantly writing, yep, season 4, still good, still great, yep, Gary Oldman, still great, Jack Lowden, still great, writing, still great, show running, still great, humour, still great. Yeah, it's not super exciting, is it?
Alastair, please don't slag off our podcast while we're doing it.
I feel we found an interesting way to explore what's going on behind rather than just critically evaluating. We are analysing as well, providing more detail through comparisons to everything from Smiley novels to the Americans. So yeah, that's how we add extra value here. And please stick with us, the 3 or so people who actually listen. But yeah, if you're just going to do straight up critical appraisals, I guess maybe people get tired of the same thing. Or is it just, again, the old British tall poppy syndrome? As soon as anything gets too beloved, it must be, oh no, hate it.
I mean, what's interesting about Slow Horses, I guess, from that perspective, is although it's extremely good and extremely competent and extremely well made, it's not necessarily saying anything massively sophisticated about society. It is not, I don't know, I would say, in a way that I'm not intending as a backhanded compliment, it's not, Succession level television. It's just an extremely good genre show.
I don't think it's aspiring to be like Succession.
No.
Really...
As I say, this was not intended as an insult towards either Succession or Slow Horses.
No, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for just doing great, entertaining TV, and this is a whole thing people talk about a lot with the thriller genre. Yeah, my partner reads a lot of thrillers, and she really likes the Jack Reacher novels, and she always says there's real skill into writing a great page turner when you're really excited. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? I've got to keep reading. I'm not going to bed. I'm sitting up reading this. I can't put it down. And I love a great genre defining and challenging literature from The Goldfinch to the novels of Ada Palmer. And those books obviously get praised for their staggering levels of creative genius and brilliant writing. But I do stand by what she says, which is as she is in my partner, that there is real skill to writing a great page turner that's exciting. And sometimes it's not celebrated enough. It's not easily done. Not anyone can do it, which is why these books are very popular. And much like the Slow Horses books, and now the Slow Horses TV shows, it's not easy to make something that just, shows up twice a year, does 6 tight episodes. Everything's great. Can't fault it. Podcasters are all happy. Guardian gives it a great review. It's not easily done, and, it deserves praise. Even if it's not trying to make a statement the way, like I say, Succession is.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying earlier about Criminal, I guess it wasn't necessarily redefining the world or presenting a drastic new thesis about the direction of society, but that too was, good, regularly released genre material, and good work. I
like the depth to this, that it is interesting. There is, a real style to it. There's lots of, interesting things going on. Especially now, I feel that the show's well established. It's in its stride. It doesn't feel the need to slowly explain things. It goes in with kind of some of the key points. We've well established the fact that Lamb is disgusting, lazy, vile. You wouldn't want to spend around him, but when he gets off his arse, he's a pretty competent spy and can get the drop on most people, including the elite spies from the park. I also like the point that they've done quite a few times, which is Lamb is ugly on the outside and unpleasant, but underneath he's loyal to his people and protects them, whereas the very slick spies from the park are, aesthetically good looking outside and impressive in terms of their spycraft and careers, things like that, but they are unpleasant people who will backstab you, betray people, murder people, bury things. They're, for want of a better word, ugly on the inside. They don't really labour the point. They've done it several times since the first season. It's kind of basically the big twist of the first season, but they come back to it each season. But I like how it's done each time, with less need to explain it, and it is a good inversion that they have.
Yeah, I do kind of hope they don't go too hard on the Jackson Lamb. He's a nice guy, really, angle. I feel like that leads to the character becoming a bit too cuddly, but yes, I do agree that that's definitely a key theme.
And also, but I do like the fact that they don't feel the need to each season have it big surprise, turns out Jackson Lamb actually competent and kind of alright, like it's a big surprise each time it happens. We know what the deal is at this point, which is one of the things that's great about sticking to a show to season 4 and it still being good. You're very familiar with it, which is when shows can do interesting things, like I say, like dig into characters' pasts, reveal that that cuddly old granddad actually is a cold-blooded death murderer.
Well, yeah, and as I say, the fact they keep cycling through characters means they've probably got plenty of material, so...
Yeah.
We'll be back next year, I'm sure, with probably more praise.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Definitely going to be back for more Slow Horses.
Okay, and next up, it's time for Timestalker. This is a film written and directed by Alice Lowe and also starring Alice Lowe as Agnes, a woman who is reincarnated throughout history, repeatedly falling in love with the wrong man again and again and again, often then dying in a series of increasingly ridiculous ways, until she one day, maybe, finds catharsis. We have seen this film. We also saw and enjoyed Alice Lowe's previous film, Revenge. Alastair, what did you think of it?
This is one that I would say good but not great, but definitely good. An enjoyable time at the cinema. It's funny, it's creative, it's off the wall, it's got lots of surprises, lots of laughs, it's very colourful. It's a nice, exciting, funny, bit silly British independent film. It's a world away from Mike Leigh and sometimes the very earnest, very serious independent films that we make in Britain. This is, something that it's short, sharp, funny. I really like Alice Lowe as a writer, performer, director. I was a big fan of her going all the way back to Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. Thought she was great in that. And yeah, as you just said, Revenge was great. Lots of good funny ideas here. I maybe come to a few things that, didn't set my world on fire, but it's a piece of cinema. Yeah, very enjoyable.
Yeah, this is fun, idiosyncratic, quirky even. It's an enjoyable bit of silly British comedy in a very sort of sitcom mode. As Alastair said, it's fun. It just doesn't maybe quite transcend and become genius. To be honest, the part I don't know. I enjoyed a lot of the early stuff when we were going back through different periods in history and increasingly stupid slapstick shit kept happening. If anything, I almost enjoyed it less when we got to the sort of vaguely more modern period that we spent a bit longer in. It's like, oh, this is actually less fun. But still had some good jokes in it. So yeah, it's alright. It's a bit slight maybe. It ended and I was just like, okay, yeah, that was fun. That was funny. I laughed a few times. It's a fun time. It's a fun time at the cinema.
Yeah, I think the character is very much like in Every Woman. The character needs a bit more three-dimensionality or something to latch onto. I mean, it's an accessible character because we've all fancied someone, we've all had unrequited love. It's accessible and things like that. But I suppose, there's not huge amounts about, the character to get deeply invested in. So maybe that's what stops it, I think, becoming great. But there is lots of fun bits. It's got a sort of feminist message to it as well, in that usually in each period in history, the women are treated quite poorly, like either no choice about who they marry, or all their possessions belong to their husband, or things like that, or are easily dispensed with. So there is a sort of message to it, under the silliness. So it's got that going for it.
Yeah, and I think it does, despite what I just said, attempts to come to some sort of conclusion about the character towards the end, which does at least give you a bit of emotion to go out on. Yeah, I didn't think it quite nailed it, but
there's a lot of great humour in it. There's some great set pieces. I kind of like one, especially. Some of the stuff might be a bit of a spoiler, but it's not really a plot-oriented film. But, if you don't want any of the jokes spoiled, we're away now. But, for example, after it does the first two time periods, you kind of get the vibe that there's it's kind of, I don't know, like a short film's worth of material. The third time period it introduces is the Victorian time, and she kind of basically just gets killed within the first, 30 seconds of that time period, which is quite funny. The first 30 seconds of you following her character. She walks down the road, she sees the man she's time stalking, a cart comes, she pushes him out of the way, she gets decapitated. It's just quite a funny little beat, and you're like, oh, right, there we go. That time period's done nice and quickly. So little things like that, a lot of good humour.
Yeah, no, as I said, the silly slapstick stuff, that sort of thing is extremely funny. I mean, even was it the first time period? One of the early time periods where they're watching him get executed and she just falls over. Yeah, that was... I very much enjoyed some of the slapstick silliness.
Yeah, that was one of the first big slapstick moments, so that was very, very funny.
Especially because the film hadn't really gone quite there yet, so it did actually just kind of come out of nowhere in a way. It was quite hilarious.
Yeah, and then set the tone for what was to come. What I also liked about that scene that really did make me laugh is because he's a sort of, the man that she's time stalking, he's, in this time period, a sort of, I think, radical Protestant preacher. It's the 17th century. He's sentenced to death, and he's sentenced to this ridiculously long, drawn-out death. He's going to be flayed on a wheel, then hung, drawn and quartered, then paraded through the streets, then burned, then put on a spike. And the thing is, they really did do all of that sort of stuff. And I've just finished reading a book about the 17th century, and the punishments that I handed out really were you'll be flayed, then burnt, then hung, then drawn and quartered, then carried through the streets, and then put on a spike. It's is it really that necessary? Isn't just the burning enough? But no, that really happened. So I appreciated that on many levels.
See, it's educational too.
It is educational, yeah. That very much set the tone of the silliness and the violence, sort of violent silliness that was to come.
Yeah, I would have liked more slapstick going forward, but there's still some slapstick.
Yeah, but those early bits definitely were very strong.
And as often happens with these sort of British movies, there's a reliable smattering of performers you vaguely recognise from other things popping up. It's nice to see Nick Frost in a regular role. Yeah,
he's good. He does her vile husband in one of the timelines, and that was very good. And he's a creepy stalker guy in the 80s as well, and things like that. He does sort of low lifes quite well. It's one of his things in his repertoire.
Yeah, no, that was another funny beat. The sort of the depressing, destined feeling that no matter what she tried to do, she would always end up with this awful man somehow, and that was that was fun. They played on that entertainingly, especially towards the end.
Yeah, no, that was good. Yeah, and the rest of the cast very strong. Tanya Reynolds as the friend, who's in every time period. I thought she's good in supporting role, funny character. Jacob Anderson, who plays a sort of spiritual guide who turns up in every timeline. Also, again, quite a sort of funny, exacerbated character. And Nye Bernard as the object of the time stalking. He is quite good as a sort of, I don't know, vappish fop who's in each time period, and frequently she discovers that actually he's not all that, even though she's obsessed with him. And that comedy beat is usually done very well. So everything's working great in the casting department.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed the tying in of his sort of vapid fop role in the past with the sort of adamant vibe in the 80s. That was fun. Yeah,
that's good. I mean, the interesting thing is that in each period she has a parasocial relationship with the man she's time stalking. It's always a sort of one-sided relationship when he's in a role when she can be aware of him and invested in him and he doesn't know who she is. In the first one, he's this radical preacher she's part of the flock. In the second time period, he's a famous highwayman. She's like aware of his infamy. In the 80s one, he's a rock star, obviously, parasocial relationships with musicians are nothing new. So yeah, that's again like another interesting little dimension that this film has to it, as well as the silliness and the slapstick violence.
Yeah, as you say, stalking is in the title. Is it subtle? I don't know. I guess it's not that subtle really, but it ends up being about stalking.
Exactly, yeah. It loops back to how obsessive fans can be about rock stars and stuff. For that, yeah, as you mentioned, longest segment, which is during the 1980s, during the sort of New Romantics boom. There is, again, quite a nice knowing note when she's like, New Romantics? I was around for the old Romantics.
And then it, as you'd kind of hope, enjoyably goes harder into sort of weirdness at the very end, which, as I say, didn't quite sing beautifully and transcend into majesty, but was a fun bit.
There's definitely a rise in the silliness and the kind of the concepts. Yeah, they were built to an appropriate conclusion. Yeah, they go to the future, 2117, and it's a sort of bizarre dystopian thing. It's not really gone into too much detail, but that was quite good. There's some other sort of weird random timepieces thrown in that you're not really sure where they fit in the chronology. Yeah, a lot of interesting ideas and various bits of weirdness going on. Certainly creative and entertaining.
Yeah, decent film. Not sure if it'll be in the top 5, but yeah, let's.
Yeah, I mean, it's disappointing that it's taken Alice Lowe 7 years to get this film made, or it's been 7 years since Prevenge. That's not a reflection on her, that's a reflection on how difficult it is to get a film made in Britain if you're not one of the mega successful directors. Even Mike Leigh and Ken Loach, who reliably get their films made and distributed, their films are largely people in rooms talking. Sometimes they get famous people to do it because they're well-known famous directors, but they don't cost probably even as much as like a series of a BBC TV drama. Probably less than to make Doctor Who, but yeah, Doctor Who is a guaranteed audience. So yeah, it's difficult for British independent films to get made. It's difficult if you're a less well-known name. Alice Lowe is well-known amongst the world of people who read Little White Lies, but not so much beyond that. And I am sure it's harder as well to be a woman to do all this. So I really hope it's not 7 years before her next film, because the last two have been great, and I hope she gets another one. I'm sure she wants to do another one before 7 years. It's just the reality of the funding apparatus. But I'm certainly on board for whatever she does next.
Oh yeah, no, I'd be interested to see what she does next. I don't know, there's a fun voice here. I feel like she's one smash hit away from taking off.
She just needs to make something that really zings and takes off, like her Shaun of the Dead or Four Weddings and a Funeral or something like that.
Yeah.
Doesn't even have to be as successful as Four Weddings, but just something that, firmly stakes her claim, as someone mainstream people should pay attention to.
Yeah, Edgar Wright's probably a decent comparison for the sort of area she's vaguely working in. It's been so long since we covered Prevenge, I can't remember if we made that comparison already.
Yeah, well, I think she's in the Ben Wheatley sort of stable, and there's some overlap with, people she's worked with, who's worked with Ben Wheatley in previous films and things like that. I mean, Alice Lowe's in Sightseers, which is a Ben Wheatley film, and also there's overlap with other things like Nick Frost, as we mentioned, from the Blood and Cornetto gang as well. So there's crossovers there, and this is it's a small world of British film, but she's moving up in profile. This has got a lot more coverage and stuff, especially in the kind of film magazines and film podcasts. So hopefully the next one we'll continue to build, and she's a great performer, a great writer, great director. So onwards and upwards, I guess, for her. That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice. Whilst you're there, please leave us a review to help other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find back episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and written pieces by Nick and myself. Head over there now to read about what philosopher Hannah Arendt would make of the Empire in Star Wars.
And if you've really enjoyed this podcast-shaped content, then why not follow us on social media, such as Twitter or Blue Sky or Facebook. I think those are the main ones, where you can find us by searching Moderate Fantasy Violence and waiting for the purple logo to pop up, and then you can be the first to hear about Alastair's latest film festival adventures. And I, meanwhile, have been Nick Bryant. You can find more from me at nickbryant.com. You could also find my new comic, Sold, that's Sould. I'm using a funny spelling on an audio podcast for maximum convenience. And that's on Kickstarter. It will be retweeted from the various MFV accounts, and it'll be tweeted endlessly from my own account. So hopefully you should be able to find it. This is a new fantasy series about a world in which souls are sold. There we go, that's why it's called that. In crystal form and used for a variety of weird and interesting things. It's a new fantasy series by myself and Stone Cop artist Phil Apley, which we've been putting together over the course of the year and had a lot of fun doing so we're excited to finally get it out there. And the one other thing I'll note is that this is a 2-week Kickstarter campaign, so unlike other campaigns where I think I've had several goes at selling them on the podcast, This is pretty much the only shout you'll get for it. It'll be over by the time of your next podcast, so if you want it, go and get it. Thank you.
If you want any more from me, you can find me by searching for Alastair Ball on Blue Sky, Threads or Instagram, or you can find my writing at redtrainblog.com, or you can find my theatre reviews on everythingtheatre.com. Next time on this podcast, it will be a Marvel villain adaptations double bill. We will be fighting an alien invasion with a superpowered parasitic version of ourselves in Venom, The Last Dance, and then we will be walking the Witcher's Road in search of power in Agatha All Along. Join us here in 2 weeks to find out what we made of those. Until then, goodbye.
Bye. Back my Kickstarter.
Yes, back it. I'm sure it's great. I haven't read it yet, but I will.
Oh, it's really good.